Just as in the days of the empire of the first century, the days of Caesar, the empire dominated the imagination of people so that they couldn't imagine anything else. The market dominates our imagination now that we can't imagine any other way.
The 1% versus the 99%, we all know it to be true, we feel it, that's how the economy works. I remember the day the Panama Papers were revealed, because it was a day I read a letter from the NHS services that my son's application for a wheelchair had been refused. Well, I knew on that day that several people that we see in the public eye through the media were avoiding thousands of pounds, and I just needed a few £100 for the right wheelchair.
So I think the 99% is one of the most interesting and one of the best pieces of political and social terminology to come out in the last maybe 5 or 10 years. It describes really well, I think, the way a lot of people feel about how the economy, about how society, about how the world works really. People have got this intuition that actually something's not right and something is a bit unfair. Think about when the term was first coined about 5 or 6 years ago. It was when the Occupy camp was happening outside St Paul's Cathedral in London. And a lot of the issues that were being identified there, right in the heart of the City of London, I think resonated with a lot of us. This kind of culture of excessive pay without any real kind of control, the idea that bonuses were really running rampant while people were really struggling, while benefits were being cut, while the social security net was having increasing holes in it. And a lot of people felt they needed some kind of language to put to that. Now, the 99% language was really helpful to do that because what it said was actually the vast majority of us in this country aren't the ones who cause the economic problems, and yet it's the vast majority of us who are actually struggling, and particularly those at the bottom of the 99%.
In James chapter 5 it reads, "Look, the wages you fail to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourself in the day of slaughter."
One of the great Christian socialist thinkers, R.H. Tawney, talked about people having economic freedom in their lives as well as civic freedom, civil rights, for example. It was important that people also had some sovereignty over their economic life, their workplace, what they do for a living. Now, in Tawney's day, we're perhaps talking about mass labour, big business, heavily labour-intensive production lines. How could people there have some control over their lives in a way that respected the fact that they're made in the image of God and that everyone is created equally? How can we apply that today then? We've got a so-called gig economy that gives many of us as consumers great freedom of choice. But is it giving everybody freedom? And is it respecting everybody as made in the image of God? Is it giving people security of income? And why would it be so unreasonable to want these things? Another challenge that's coming our way that is much talked about is automation, where once you had mass labour on production lines replaced by robots, for example, in car production, now automation is coming to other areas too. Perhaps soon we'll have driverless cars. Perhaps social care will have robots helping with lifting people. But might be an impact on the employment market when that happens. And will it be bad or good? I think the answer to that is it's up to us. Giving people more time to do other things is a really good thing, particularly if it can be in ways that express our creativity as people made in the image of God. But if people are being made redundant, without proper training for new opportunities, without having a stake in the economy and a stake in our future, that's not such a good thing. And this isn't just about economic forces beyond our control. It's our world, it's our society, it's our country. The choices are ours. The choices are affected by our values. So the challenge is, how can we ensure that we have an economy that works for everybody, even as change happens? We can do it. The question is whether we have the will and whether we're prepared to apply our minds to it.
Throughout human history, the inherent dignity of work has been distorted by those who seek to accrue wealth and power for themselves, but by exploiting others. We read it in the Bible. The biblical empires of Egypt, Babylon, and Rome were all built on slavery and subjugation. So let's not pretend that alienated labour began with the Industrial Revolution. But just because societies throughout the ages have all included an oppressed labour class, that by no means legitimises the practice. In fact, the Bible expects and demands there to be justice in labour relations. Nehemiah chapter 5. About this time, some of the men and their wives raised a cry of protest against their fellow Jews. They were saying, "We have such large families, we need more food to survive." Others said, "We have mortgaged our fields, vineyards and homes to get food during the famine." And others said, "We have had to borrow money on our fields and vineyards to pay our taxes. We belong to the same family as those who are wealthy, and our children are just like theirs. Yet we must sell our children into slavery just to get enough money to live. We have already sold some of our daughters, and we are helpless to do anything about it, for our fields and vineyards are already mortgaged to others." When I heard their complaints, I was very angry. After thinking it over, I spoke out against the nobles and officials. So why is it that despite the passing of ancient empires, our society still retains deep structural inequalities? How can it be that a banker can earn millions of pounds through bonuses, whilst a cleaner hoovering his office will be considered lucky if they even receive a living wage? We need to be clear, and this is important, that such a system is a long, long way from the kingdom of God.
By being involved in a church, you're doing something deeply political, actually. You're saying that I want to spend time with people who are different to me, people who I wouldn't spend time with necessarily were it not for our shared commitment to Christian life. And actually, churches are the sort of places where, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen, someone in the 1% and the 99% actually end up meeting and interacting. And in those circumstances, you can actually have a transformative experience that isn't about, targeting the rich and trying to take money away from them necessarily. What it's about is trying to recognize that we all benefit from sharing together, and we all benefit from, the elimination of this 99% and the 1%.
Leviticus chapter 25 says, "In the year of Jubilee, everyone is to return to their own property. If you sell your land to any of your own people or buy land from them, do not take advantage of each other. You are to buy from your own people on the basis of the number of years since the Jubilee, and they are to sell to you on the basis of the number of years left for harvesting crops. When the years are many, you are to increase the price, and when the years are few, you are to decrease the price. Because what is really being sold to you is the number of crops. Do not take advantage of each other, but fear your God."
When the children of Israel stopped believing that what they had been given was a gift, when they started trying to manage it, when they started trying to hold it in a tight grasp rather than enjoying it as a gift of God, that's when things started to go wrong. And that's where the Jubilee principles and the Sabbath principles came in. God, knowing us better than we know ourselves, knows that inevitably property, land, will trickle up to the powerful and the wealthy rather than trickle down to the least of these. So every 50 years, there was a reset. Land went back to its original owners. That's a hugely important reset. It means that people who would not necessarily have any stake suddenly again have a stake.
A lot of the discontent that we've seen in society recently may have been addressed if people had taken those Jubilee laws seriously and the principles behind them. Well, what are those principles? First of all, they recognise that debt can be corrosive and can ruin people's lives, hence the law about cancelling debts. Secondly, it recognises that each generation should have a fair start in life, hence the rule that assets are redistributed, in effect, every generation. So the challenge for us is, what does that mean today in politics? Does it mean wealth redistribution? Does it mean distribution of educational opportunities? Yes, I think it means those things. But we have to try and apply those Jubilee laws. And if we do today, I think we might have the basis of a sound Christian and left-wing economic policy.
We are currently witnessing an unravelling of half a century of positive progress in workers' rights. These days, the drive to deliver ever higher profit margins seems to be based on the philosophy of pressurising the workforce, rather than innovating for greater productivity. This can be seen in the emergence of the gig economy, zero-hour contracts, and the problem of underemployment. Do we buy the argument that says at least they should be grateful they have a job? Isn't it that argument that globalised capital used to justify sweatshops? That sort of economics essentially privatises profit and socialises risk. It's the same logic that multinational companies use to justify tax avoidance, which deprives governments of the revenues they need to sustain the health and well-being of their population. The current economic model is not unfairly described as a race to the bottom, in which too many human beings are diminished rather than dignified. People are ground down and then discarded, all for the sake of profit. In God's economy, human potential is cultivated, given opportunity to flourish, and abundance therefore follows.
If we're thinking about economic policy, we also need to ensure that we are credible. Now, what does it mean to be credible? It means policies that actually do work economically, that aren't sort of just dreamt up in a fantasy land. Secondly, politics that work for everyone. And that means that people who've been suffering squeezed incomes actually see that what we're doing is not only credible for financial markets or for big business, but addresses their needs too, because they are the people that we're in politics about.
So what I think we need to do is to listen to people's lived experience, not just of how the economy in theory isn't working, but of how the economy is actually not working for real people in real communities, like right here in East London. So, for instance, one of the issues that the Occupy movement raised was this whole idea of the differentials between how much people in the City of London are paid in bonuses and how much ordinary people earn. I think that's brilliant. The problem is that too many of us are articulating that, and we're actually reasonably well off. We may not be in the 1% in the UK, but we're actually globally in the 1%. And what we as Christians, I think, should be really concerned about, what Christian social teaching tells us, is that actually we're trying to find the common good, not necessarily to polarize between the 99% and the 1%, but to say that actually if we were to make a more equitable and just society, this would be a benefit not just to the 99%, but to the 1%. So I think of something like the Keep Sunday Special campaign that Christians on the left has been involved in. Now, you know, we were attacked on that, saying we were trying to push things back to the 50s. We didn't understand how a contemporary market economy works, that we're just trying to hold back something that's inevitable. People can shop online, so why not just have open all hours on a Sunday? Well, actually, we want to say no, because the only value that's being honoured there is the value of money. And we want to say there are actually other values, the values that theology teaches us of human dignity and of human flourishing, the need for family time, that kind of thing actually really prompts us to say no. Retail workers deserve time with their family on a Sunday. And actually it does need to be a Sunday, because that's the day that the kids have got off school. That's the day that people who don't work in retail are likely to be at home as well. So that's one way in which we can kind of really stand against the commodification of our human dignity.
Jesus says, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years to come. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you."
So the 99% language has been really helpful in kind of helping us to articulate a problem. But I think Christian social teaching is actually one of the ways in which we're going to get out of some of these problems. So if we look from that kind of theory through to our practice, there's so much stuff, so much great work that's already been done showing us the way. So for instance, as Christians on the left, we'd want to say it's a good thing to join a trade union, for instance. Trade unions are a way of standing against the kind of commodification of life, which just says the only reason that you're at work is, to be an economic unit of production for the shareholders. I was speaking to someone recently who's a press officer for a Christian organisation, and he said that they did some work with a kind of mainstream broadcaster, and the broadcaster, when interviewed this high-profile Christian figure, said that they didn't understand something that the person had said. And what that person had said is that they wanted the church to be good news. And this language just jarred, because they said, is that a mistake? Are you saying you want to do good things, or you want to tell good news? Well, no, actually, the church is supposed to be good news. And that's inherently political. So in the ways that churches have, for instance, campaigned to keep Sunday special, or in another way, the ways that churches have, campaigned for a cap on the cost of credit, the way that churches have successfully been the kind of start and the real basis of the living wage campaign, the way in which churches have supported mutuals and credit unions, that kind of thing. These are all ways in which we are being good news to our community.